Welcome to the Bible Theology blog on a special day, which is Reformation Day, and an amazing landmark in Protestant history, the day that Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses on a church door and started or expanded the Reformation. And this video is appropriate for the day that it's on, because the issue with the church at that time was they basically told you, look, as a regular person that attended, you were seen as somebody that was insignificant when it came to how do we understand the Bible. Everything on understanding should have been through the lens of the church. And that was how they viewed everything. And today, we've gotten away from that, where everybody can find out the facts for themselves. And we will see why that is important here. The reason for this video was something that was just very interesting. James White posted a video where he claimed that Junia was a man, although he does say, well, you don't really know. Okay, and then he kind of went on a long tangent of different things, but basically his whole analysis was you just can't know. He said, this is a quote, "We don't know whether this is a masculine or feminine form. There would be no way of knowing for the first 800 to 900 years of the transmission of the text whether that was specifically meant to be masculine or feminine. Just simply by looking at it, there's no way of differentiating it." Well, I posted a comment that was deleted. They deleted the truth. And I don't know if it was James White or if it was somebody who worked for him, but they deleted it. I showed evidence, irrefutable evidence, that Junia is a well-attested feminine name, and they deleted it. Isn't that what false teachers do? Delete facts? I was watching another video by James White, and I appreciate when he corrects people of their error, and this was such an instance. It was actually Jeffrey Riddle, and Jeffrey Riddle was making assertions based on P46, and James White rightly corrected him and just absolutely torched him. I mean, absolutely torched him. I mean, James was right. But I do think it's ironic because in Matthew 7:5, it does say, "Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye." And here's the problem. James has a lot of credentials, and a lot of people look up to him for the truth. And when somebody like that does not tell you the truth and hides the truth, that is a major problem in the church. A huge problem. You just can't do that. It's intellectually dishonest. Now, to give James the benefit of the doubt, I don't know if it was him that deleted it, but obviously it's a policy for them there to delete video comments that go against their narrative if they're honest, because they do allow dissenting comments. There's a lot of dissenting comments. None of them had super factual information. Mine was the only one that actually had pure facts that could not be disputed. So you have to ask, why is he not educating himself? Because he is constantly criticizing others for not being educated. Why not educate yourself? It's just so intellectually dishonest. As I explain in my book, A Biblical Case for Women Elders, Pastors, and Deacons, there is a lot of evidence, for one, that Junia was a woman. It's attested in at least 250 inscriptions that Junia, as a woman's name, well attested. On the flip side, Junius, which is basically this made-up Greek name that does not exist, it's found nowhere. They say, well, Junia was actually Junius, which was a man. And so if we decline it this way, then we can say, well, Junia was a man. And so many people have run with this narrative. And you have to ask yourself, because this is another thing that James White does on the video. He's like, well, if this is what they have to cling to for their theology, well, obviously it's wrong, right? Okay, let's take that and stop for a second. Think about what you're doing right now, because that's exactly what he's doing. He's making a woman a man to basically disprove this point. And taking what James said, that means that you're obviously so wrong on this point that you have to make a woman's name be a man's name for you to get the win. So whose argument is weak at that point? I'm going to say it's yours, James White. I'm going to say it's yours. As I explained, you can tell for sure that Junia was a woman. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I will actually start with his conclusion, which is ironic. He says, you cannot refute, this is what James said, you cannot refute the assertion that it is possible to read Romans 16:7 with Junius being a female and with Junius being included amongst the apostles, like she was actually an apostle. Okay, so I do credit him for at least making that assertion, but he leaves out the ginormous amount of evidence out of the facts. It's like when you watch a crime drama or a lawyer drama, and the lawyer doesn't want to lose the case, so instead of disclosing all of the evidence, they hide it somewhere and hope that the prosecution or vice versa, or the defense doesn't find that document, or the person that's suing or being sued. That's what's happening here. It's just not right. It's like, as Christians, we have a higher standard that we should live up to. I think that's why James said in James 3:1, "Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church, for we who teach will be judged more strictly." And that's true. We are going to be judged more strictly. That's why when I teach on this topic, I make sure that I've properly studied the facts. And here's the thing. Everybody makes mistakes. The difference is, though, if you send me an email and say, hey, you made an error, I'll correct it. I'll even make a video to say that I made an error, because no one is perfect. But there's a difference between not being perfect and actually misrepresenting facts, which is what we're talking about here. So let me give you a couple of other arguments that basically the comment I put on there. He had talked about how Junia is only used once, which is a hapax legomenon, and he just goes off and off. Like, he basically says you can't prove anything from that. And so I made a comment that said hapax legomenon arguments are generally weak because the term or name is generally used somewhere else. That's why lexicons exist. Also, the Packard Humanities Institute website contains plenty of Junia examples that are all feminine. Masculine Junius is unattested in Greek anywhere. It is completely made up by complementarians. One example that I gave from the website is Mamumia Junia or Junia Zosa Healte, which is Junia Mumia lived by herself. And we know it's feminine because it says Healte. That's herself. Okay, it's not a man. That's just one example, but there's 250 examples of inscriptions. I can't put that long of a comment on YouTube. It would probably been seen as spam. But I put the link in there where you can easily see that exact inscription. It's not a website I made up. It's a university website. Okay. So here's the thing. We know that for sure it's a woman's name because we also have other Greek references in other works where it shows that it's a feminine name. And one thing, just to quote James here in his video, he says, theologians in general tend to dismiss textual evidence without wading into it quite as deeply as they should. That comment is ironic because he did zero research at all on whether Junia could be a woman's name. And even if he did, he missed it. And I commented and gave him the evidence and he deleted it. So he obviously doesn't really care to wade into all of the evidence. Irony. I looked at the TLG Thesaurus Lingua Greca. I don't know if these all have English translations, but I'll give you a couple. I'll just give you the English you can go look up. I'll put my blog post on there. You can look up the Greek if you want and give the references. You can easily look them up on that site if you have a subscription. It is an excellent resource if you do study Greek. You can find a lot of great works on there. I'm not getting paid to say that, but it is a great resource. The first one is from Plutarch, The Life of Brutus and the Parallel Lives. 7.1 is translated by Bernadette Perrin, so not my translation. It says, since Cassius was the husband of Junia, which is Junia, which is dative, a sister of Brutus, which is Adelphi Brutu. So Junia is the dative, so a more literal translation would be husband to Junia, but I'm not going to nitpick. But if somebody's like, oh, that is not a very literal translation, yeah, I would agree, but it's okay. So this volume was published in the Loeb Classic Library in 1918. So that's one perfect example, completely indisputable. Junia there is a woman because she's both a wife and a sister. Okay. One of the things that I point out in my book is also that Junia was a family name. So if your name was Unianus or Junius, which is ironically the same name that they are saying that Junia was, that it was a Unianus. But the difference is their spelling ends with alpha sigma, and Unianus that's actually attested is Omicron sigma. The difference is with Omicron sigma ending, that declension would not fall and be a possibility because we know how it's declined. So therefore, it's an improbability. But one inscription actually lists out a family tree. It says Graphikas, the Caphacian, which is a man. Then they have Junius, the first Caphacian man. It's a man. And then we have Junia, Asclepia, I think, from Caphacia. I can't say Caphacia very well. So, I should have actually read the Greek. It would have been easier to pronounce. I'm reading the English translation. So one thing that we know on it's feminine is with enumerations. Enumerations always contain the same case. So when you list out names like the 12 disciples, if you list the 12 disciples out in the Gospels, it's always going to be in the same case. It'll be nominative, it might be accusative, whatnot. So we know then how it's declined. A couple here. So we have, in remembrance of the holy apostles, Andronicus, which is genitive, which is Andronikou. And it says one of the 70, and of Junia, which is erroneous, which is genitive, and then it goes on to say Andronicus, the apostle of Christ. Now, here's a couple of things of why we know it's feminine. One is because it's genitive, and so erroneous is a genitive form of Junia, the feminine genitive form. Now, here's what's ironic is erroneous, that would still be the same of the made-up masculine nominative name of this erroneous that was made up, which begs the question, that means if that name really did exist, you're actually giving a man a woman's name. I wonder if they would have done that. Probably not. But we know because it's genitive, it's a woman's name because that's the genitive form. Here's another reason why we know is because they actually say, this is actually Basil the second. He actually says that Andronicus is one of the 70 apostles. Okay, and then it goes on again and says, Andronicus is the apostle of Christ. But Junia, on the other hand, is not. Why? Even though Paul put them together in the same boat, that they're both among the apostles. See how he did that? Yeah. He actually cut Junia out. Obviously, if Junia was a man's name, he'd have no problem saying that he was one of the 70 apostles. Another inscription similar, it says, in remembrance of the holy apostle Andronicus, which is Androniku again, which is genitive. One of the 70, and Junia, which is erroneous, which is genitive. Andronicus, the apostle of Christ, and that was from the Menology of Emperor Basil II. And that was from about 976 to 1025 is when he lived, I believe. Here's another example from the canon of the Holy Apostles, Andronicus, which is Andronikon, which is accusative, and Junia, which is Union, which is accusative, day 17. That one was from Joseph the Hymnographer, which I believe he lived about 9th century, early 9th century. So that one's also an enumeration, so we know that is, in fact, Junia is a feminine name. Also, obviously, the blatant bias again, because he calls Andronicus an apostle, but Junia not so much. So once again, we know Junia is definitely feminine because otherwise you would not see the blatant bias. Okay. Here's another example. In remembrance of the holy apostle Andronicus, one of the 70, and of Junia, which is genitive, which is erroneous, and then Androniku, which is genitive. And once again, it's an enumeration, therefore, Junia is once again feminine. And once again, we see the blatant bias again. Another work that we have, we see it says, after a long period of time, it was revealed to be from a manifestation appointed by God to a man, Nicholas the cleric, who was a scribe. God appointed the remnant out of many, which included Andronicus, which is Androniku, genitive, and Junia, which is erroneous, which is also genitive, who were holy apostles. Plural. Genitive, plural. The apostle reminds us of this in the epistle to the Romans. So we know erroneous is feminine because Andronicus and Junia were in an enumeration. Therefore, both had to be genitive because also ton hagion apostolon, which is who were holy apostles, is genitive plural. So it would have to be horrible Greek otherwise. Later in the same work, we actually also see tain huperthalmaston union, which would be translated the most admirable Junia. We know that Junia there has to be feminine because the article tain is feminine, and the adjective huperthalmaston then has to be feminine, which would then obviously make Junia feminine. Why? Because an adjective has to agree with the substantive or noun that it modifies in case, gender, and number. Just basic Greek grammar. Okay, we see the same phrase again in the Menology of Emperor Basil II. Okay. There's another one from Theodore Dexius, I think is how you pronounce his name, in Epistle and Theology, Epistle 2. It's also enumeration, which is Andronicus and Junia. Since it's enumeration, once again, Junia has to be a feminine. There's only one example that I have ever seen in all of Greek literature that could potentially be an enumeration. And in the enumeration, there's Kai, Junia, Philippou, and then Kai, Tha'a, Datu. And generally with enumerations, if they're separate names, though, you're going to actually see Kai in between the two names. So that should be taken together, Junia, Philippou. Now, the first thing is Junia is not accented as a masculine name, would be the first key. The second thing is it is possible that it could be simple apposition. So it could be Junius Philip. Okay. That is a possibility, because if Junius was a real name, Junia would be the genitive form. So this one is notably a little complicated. On the other hand, Junia could be a feminine form there in the nominative case, and Philip could be the genitive that is modifying it. So it would be literally translated Junia, the wife of Philip. But since Philip is the genitive in the enumeration, it would actually be Philip, the husband of Junia. And so this is actually in the same work that called Junia a woman several times. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, if that's the case, if this really was a masculine name, the author did a terrible job. They should have used a feminine article there to identify, a masculine article there, which would be to, in front of Junia, to show that it's a masculine name. And since it doesn't do that, and the name is actually used in the work several other times, showing it to be for sure a feminine, I can't accept that as a possibility, and neither did Thesaurus Lingua Greca as well. They also believed it to be a feminine name, as well as, I'm guessing when it was written, it was probably accented that way as well. So there we go. There we have it. Those are all the evidence that we have that from TLG, they call it. Here's the thing. If you want more evidence, read my book. John Chrysostom, he also calls Junia a woman and one of the 70 apostles. So there is tons of evidence that not only was she an apostle, but also a woman. So here's the thing. Little piece of advice. If you're going to say, okay, Junia is not a woman, please give me some evidence that is the case. One of the things I was going to address too at the very start of James's video, he said, first of all, this is a textual variant. That doesn't ever help anybody. Okay. And basically what he's trying to say is, look, because it's a textual variant, then we could never know. But here's the thing. the textual variant would be Aeolian, which is Julia, basically. A feminine name, well attested. Okay, so yeah, so it's either Julia or Junia, but either way, they're both women. But I find it ironic that he would make that kind of comment. Basically, he's saying, well, we can't trust the Bible because there's a textual variant, as if there's no other textual variant. So is he saying, look, we should never trust the Bible because there's textual variants? Of course not. That's absolutely ludicrous. Most of the textual variants have no bearing on the text at all. And either way, it's not going to help his argument. And it has to be one of them. There's no other attestation of any other name there in the book. So that's it. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you on another video coming up, and have a good night.